Thank you to the Patreon members for supporting the channel. The Iron Teeth were reveling in their success. They had completed their new large water wheel just as the waters returned and brought the region back to life. After a job well done, these beavers slept good that night. But the next day, it was back to work. They now had plenty of power to make planks and gears, and plenty of trees to fell for logs. And the long-awaited oak trees were starting to sprout as well. These massive trees had taken forever to mature, but now would supply the beavers with a huge amount of logs. They could use these in construction, like building better water storage, so the pumpers could really stock up. Speaking of water, Kajabi's mangrove trees were all grown, but hadn't started fruiting yet, so the Iron Teeth family had a lot going for it. Plus, they had several kits growing up, and more babies being produced every day. The Iron Teeth family was on the rise. Things were looking up for the Folktails as well. They had to replant their carrots after the drought, but at least the water pumpers could get back to work. And since they were reconfiguring their land use, the farmers planted a field of potatoes as well. There were some real challenges to living in this islands region, like the large amount of bad water, the uncontrollable spread of the river, the minimal amount of land available on which to build and farm. But the Folktails were feeling optimistic they could overcome, and their leader Vrisco had a plan for at least one of those challenges, and now that the dry season was over, they could really get to work. The builders had already started on the bridge between the islands, but they were going to need a lot more planks to realize Vrisco's vision, so they plotted another lumber mill to double their output. But that wouldn't do much good until the tree farm kicked into high gear. And worse still, the one lumber mill was already underpowered. They were going to need a lot more power for 2 mills, so they made plans to move the existing water wheel so they could add another wheel behind it. This was a big undertaking, but one that should pay off in the long term and enable them to complete Vrisco's plan. The Iron Teeth weren't having any problem with power thanks to their new large water wheel, and they weren't having any problem with logs either. In fact, they had so much power, they decided to build another gear workshop. If they could speed up their production of gears, that would speed up their building plans as well, because their family was growing, and keeping water stock was becoming a problem. But with gears, they could build larger water storage, an important step in protecting their growth. The next day, the new gear shop was up and running, but now the Beavers had a different problem. The Iron Teeth were expanding and advancing quickly, but their family wasn't big enough to fill all the new jobs and roles they were trying to add. They wanted more storage, they needed gears to make it happen, but they were constantly having to prioritize jobs and shift workers around to fill gaps. In this case, their unorthodox way of reproducing was actually holding them back. But for now, they were making it work, and shuffling beavers was the name of the game. They could still lay the groundwork now, even if it was a little messy and complicated, and their family would be better off for it once they grew a little more. The Folktail family, on the other hand, was going through a population boom. The houses had been built, and now they were being filled, which was great for their labor force, but was having an interesting effect on the colony. Nearly all the beavers who had migrated to this land had passed away. The new generation of Folktails didn't know the old stories, didn't know about Vinjin and what he had done for them, didn't know about the long feud with the Iron Teeth. The family had changed a lot in a relatively short period, and the old ways and stories had been neglected along the way. Understandable, of course. The Beavers had been busy. They had been fighting off extinction since they moved here. The population boom was necessary to survive. And now the Beavers were focused on what was next, like Vrisco's platforms. Passing down the family history hadn't been top priority for Vrisco in the older generation, and it showed. The colony was focused on survival. They didn't have time for much else, and their dedication was paying off, as a new crop of carrots popped up, and the work on the second water wheel was finally completed, which meant the Beavers had enough power to really make progress on Vrisco's plan. The family continued to grow, despite the rapid loss of the oldest beavers, and before long, Vrisco himself was the last beaver who remembered his grandfather Venjo and the settlement he had led. So maybe now it was time for a new legacy, to give this new generation something they could be proud of too. Vrisco's mega platform could be that thing, and with the extra power to their lumber mills, that vision was within reach. The Iron Teeth weren't as concerned with legacy and mega builds at the moment. They had more reasonable tasks to keep them busy, like rearranging their farms and storage, trying to create the perfect layout for their settlement while it was still easy to do. Although they did have one odd situation where their new water wheel just suddenly stopped spinning. Like, stopped spinning entirely. Their entire industry came to a halt for no apparent reason. The wheel had just stopped. The engineers took a look and found that a crucial mechanism had been compromised and broken. But how could that be? The wheel was brand new. How could it have broken already? Unless it had been compromised intentionally. But who would do that? It was a mystery, but for now the Beavers focused on fixing the problem. Oh, and some of the coffee bushes had matured. They would still have to wait for the beans, but this was exciting progress, and the builders had fixed the wheel and reconfigured the industries, so everything was rolling again for the Iron Teeth. Sunflowers had sprouted, potatoes were ready for harvest. The Folktales settlement had really stabilized after their near starvation, and Vrisco's platform plan was well underway, and more land would be usable soon, assuming their log supply kept up with the growing demand. It wasn't a popular choice when Vrisco had the family move here, but you had to admit, these beavers were really settling in and making these islands a suitable home for themselves. So maybe Vrisco wasn't such a bad leader after all. And it wasn't long before the first platform-based farmhouse was completed, which meant there was more land available to farm. These beavers were about to totally transform this island. The mega platform would set the colony up for a successful future, all thanks to Vrisco's unique leadership. I'm not sure Venjo himself could have envisioned moving all your buildings onto platforms to optimize your green land. But here they were, doing just that. Vrisco's leadership had really turned this colony around, and for the first time, these folktales felt like they were truly succeeding, that they had a real shot now, thanks to Vrisco. And their optimism came at a good time, because a drought was approaching. The Iron Teeth knew about the coming drought too, but they had less reason to be concerned. In fact, they were more interested in how many logs they were bringing in, because their tree farm was seriously booming now that the oaks were maturing. They started plotting extra projects just because they could, and of course they would keep their industries running as long as possible. But no, the Iron Teeth were not worried about the drought ahead. Vrisco may have proven himself as a Folktales leader, but there was never any doubt that Rozzy was leading the Iron Teeth family well. And as they prepared for the coming dry season, everything was going splendidly. Oh, and the mangrove trees were fruiting, little apples were showing up among the leaves, and the Iron Teeth had a new food source to enjoy. They had to reshuffle jobs again, but soon they had a beaver gathering up this new fruit. That was still the one thing holding the family back. Not enough available workers. Every time something came up, like coffee beans being ready to harvest, workers had to be shuffled around to fill the new job. The breeding pods were operational, but the family wasn't growing as fast as they would like. The Folktales had plenty of young, strong worker beavers, but they had another problem. And it wasn't that they were out of logs or that their tree farm wasn't looking so good. This problem was bigger than that. The Folktales houses were being filled with the cries of baby beavers, but just one day before the drought was supposed to hit, their leader Vrisco passed away peacefully. He was the last of the Exodus generation, the one who had settled them here, the one who had guided their newfound success, the underdog leader who had proven himself worthy. And now he was gone, and the family would have to figure out how to go on without him. The Beavers were shocked. This was the new generation's first real loss, but the drought was coming. There was no time to properly mourn. So the Beavers agreed to get back to work to make sure they were ready for the drought and then have a formal memorial during the dry season. A chance to honor the only leader any of these Beavers had ever known. If they had known their history, these folktales would have remembered that Vrisco wasn't the first leader to pass just before a dry season, and that their patriarch Vinjin had passed the same way. But they didn't know their family history. They didn't know it at all. The Iron Teeth were doing what they could to prepare for the dry season. The water wheel was powering the production of a few more planks and gears. The water pumpers were hurrying to fill their new, larger water tanks. The mangrove fruit were being picked, and the food warehouses were being stocked. And don't forget that the tree farm was mega producing. They were so backlogged that some of the pines had started to sap, and they were running out of room to store the logs. Not a bad problem to have, though, and a testament to how well the Iron Teeth were doing. So the Beavers finished up a solid day's work and got to bed. And in the morning, the drought started. But of course, the Iron Teeth were fine. They couldn't pump water and they had no power, but they were prepared for that, and everything was fine. But the Iron Teeth spies brought word that the Folktales leader had died, and this news moved Rozzy quite a bit. The Iron Teeth had mostly ignored the Folktales since the resettlement, but the families did have a history, and though they had been enemies, Rozzy was saddened to hear of the passing of the Folktales leader, Venjo. You see, the Iron Teeth didn't know Venjo had already passed. They knew nothing about Vrisco, and so, moved by compassion and a desire to bury the hatchet, Rozzy and his entourage set out to the Folktales settlement to pay respects to their old foe. But he promised to be back before the end of the dry season. The Folktales felt prepared for the drought as well. The water swept away as the river dried up, leaving their land cracked and dry, and most of their plants dying, except for the area around the deep pool. But they had plenty of food and a good amount of water, so they knew they were going to be all right, and also that they could afford to take a break for the planned memorial. They had put it off to prepare for the drought. Now they had the time they needed to properly mourn. So the Beavers tidied up and planned to hold the service the next day. It would be a celebration of life, a chance to share memories and to express their gratitude for all Vrisco had done for them. And in the morning, when the family gathered for the memorial, they were understandably caught off guard when, to their surprise, an envoy of Iron Teeth Beavers arrived at their settlement, bringing gifts and wanting to pay their respects. As the Iron Teeth approached, the Folktails were confused, to say the least. They gave the Iron Teeth a wide berth. They weren't sure what to make of this. Eventually, the Folktails gave the Iron Teeth a place to sit and rest, while they tried to sort out what to do with this situation. These gray beavers were very suspicious. They didn't even know the name of the leader they supposedly had come to honor. Who were these beavers? Where did they come from? How did they get here? And how did they know the Folktails' business? The Folktails didn't like it, not one bit, but without a leader, they weren't sure what to do. So they made Rozzy and his beavers their prisoners, made a makeshift jail on a neighboring island, and left the poor beavers there until they could sort out what to do with them. Rozzy and his troops were in big trouble, and even worse, the rest of the Iron Teeth back home had no idea. Unlike the Folktails, the Iron Teeth did remember their old foes. No one really liked that Rozzy had tried to go make peace, but no one expected the Folktails would do something crazy like kidnap their leader and hold him prisoner, so no one was that worried about it. And besides, Rozzy had left them with work to do, and they intended to do it. The family would do their part, and trust that Rozzy knew how to deal with those tricky Folktails. Just focus on the work, and Rozzy would be safely home before they even had a chance to miss him. So the Beavers tackled their dry season projects and spent the evening speculating about how Rozzy probably went off on those pesky Folktails. They did miss Rozzy a lot. The family wasn't the same without him. But not to worry, he would be home soon. And then to everyone's relief, the river began flowing again. Fresh water came rolling back into the region, bringing back life to the land and plants. The bad water also began bubbling up again, and soon it was flowing through the land as well, mixing with the fresh water into a conflicted blend. The drought was over, and the settlement was back to normal, except that Rozzy hadn't returned like he had promised, and now the Iron Teeth were at a loss. What had the Folktails done with Rozzy? Hey everyone, Lieutenant Dan here. Thanks for watching this episode of Beaver Tales. I just wanted to say thanks for helping to make this series the most successful series on the channel yet. I am so encouraged by the support, and I'm excited to bring you more content soon. So thank you guys for watching, and thanks again to the Patreon members for their support of the channel. You guys have a fantastic day.